Hello, everybody. Hello. It's great to see you all. I hope you've all had a restorative, rich, wonderful holiday break. Today, we are kicking off a new semester of our visiting speaker series. And it is my very, very great pleasure to introduce to you all Professor Tatyana Kostochka. All the more embarrassing that I fumbled over your name, given that we've been dear friends for years and have been spending time with each other all week. But, we brushed the cobwebs off after a period of absence. So I'll take that one as my sole error in what remains of this introduction. Professor Kostochka is an assistant professor of philosophy at Ashoka University in Sonipat, India. A little bit of trivia is that we were also colleagues in the previous academic year. She completed her PhD at the University of Southern California, and her research interests and areas of expertise are really quite broad. On the one hand, Professor Kostochka has interests in the nature of moods, has authored some work that might qualify as more analytic philosophical work in this tradition, having published a paper on the nature of moods in the journal Synthèse. On the other hand, Professor Kostochka has work in Buddhist philosophy, specifically with a view to medieval Chinese and Japanese discussions in this area. Today, we are pivoting to something a little bit different, it would seem, as the title suggests. A little bit of work in aesthetics, metaphysics, among other things. The title of Professor Kostochka's presentation is Funny Games, an analysis of humor as gameplay. Now, right before I hand things over, the usual procedural remarks. Professor Kostochka will present her material, after which we will have a Q&A, and then subsequently a reception downstairs at the Port Club. So be mindful of that if you wish to continue the ensuing discussions informally later in the evening. With that, then, I would love it if we all gave our visitor a round of applause, and we'll proceed.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, despite not knowing my name. It's okay. It's okay. No, earlier he was pronouncing my name perfectly. It was fine. Anyway, so as Ben said, today I want to talk to you about games and humor. So I really appreciate you having me come here. Clearly you're coming off of break. I am benefiting off of all of your renewed energy to the new semester. I'm here to sap it all away. And so, Ben was saying that, well, I've been approached a couple times. People are asking me, well, this talk is about humor. Like, is it going to be a funny talk? And I just want to say that I don't know, but I like intentionally named the talk after a deeply disturbing horror movie. So I just want you to be pretty sure that between the two works of the same name, this one is going to be the more lighthearted one. So at least we'll win on that front. So kind of to start with, I just want to tell you kind of where I'm going here. First, I want to talk a little bit about senses of humor and their connection to my more regular program of research and moods. Then I want to set up the question that I'm going to be exploring today, which is what makes things funny? Give you some options of answers that have been previously suggested. I'm going to reject them all. Then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about games and present to you the idea of humor as gameplay. And so then in the last three sections, I just want to quickly address kind of the way that this view that I'm proposing is going to bear on some topics related to humor, particularly ethical topics, as with inappropriate jokes, and like when it is appropriate to tell certain kinds of jokes, when is humor of certain kinds okay and when it's not. So kind of hold on, I got to hit it harder, I think. Yeah. So first of all, when I'm talking about senses of humor, I think I want to clarify that, well, we could mean one of two things, actually probably more, but sometimes people ask like, does that person have a sense of humor? Or they say, oh, like he really takes life with a sense of humor. So it's kind of like a having it or not having it. And that's not really the sense that I have in mind when we're talking about today. Really, what I have in mind is more something like when somebody says, oh, she has a really dry sense of humor, or oh, has a really silly sense of humor, something like that. So as Ben said, my kind of main research area, or one of my main research areas so far, has been on moods. And one of the things that I look at is, of course, the ways that moods affect other parts of our psychology, or the way that they affect how we act out in the world. So, for example, there we are predisposed to make mood congruent judgments. So, like when we're in a good mood, we're more likely to judge things positively. When we're in a bad mood, we're more likely to judge things as negatively. People in good moods are more likely to be impolite, but also people in bad moods are more likely to be, well, slightly more realistic predictions of odds. So like people in good moods are generally less risk averse. And of course, these are kind of general correlations, but we have individual correlations as well. For example, there's a kind of, it's enough of a common thing that it has entered the general parlance, the word hangry. So, people frequently become frustrated, get in a frustrated mood when they're hungry. I tell people that I don't get hangry, I get had, because I just get really upset and very sad, and like suddenly like, oh, is life worth living anymore without, until I like, I don't know, get some noodle soup or whatever. So the thing that's interesting and that kind of got me thinking about humor is that we also observe similar kinds of variations with moods when it comes to our sense of humor. And in particular, it seems that moods have several kinds of effects on our senses of humor. So first, they affect what we find funny. Like in a silly mood, you might find the stylings of Monty Python to be just absolutely uproariously hilarious. In a different mood, mm, I don't know. This is just dumb or whatever. Um, on the other hand, oh, we are missing the well. On the other hand, in some moods, we might prefer uh, the kind of angsty, uh, deeply kind of pensive stylings of Simon Amstel. The thing that's being blocked out on the screen is his opening line to his, I think, 2012 show, where he opens the show with saying, "So I'm lonely. Let's start with that." And proceeds, for an hour to tell us about how lonely he is, but in just the most hilarious way if you're in a certain mood. We also, other than just changing what we find funny, depending on mood, it also changes just how we tell jokes. So, are we going to give it another try? Okay. Yeah, I think that is better. Okay. Okay, great. Sweet. Yeah, I can control it. Yeah, so sometimes in certain moods, we might tend to joke in different ways. In a particularly frustrated mood, I might go for something a little more aggressive in terms of humor. Like here, comedian Pete Davidson goes at famous American football player Peyton Manning by saying Peyton looks like if football players evolved to no longer need helmets. On the other hand, in some moods, that's just rude, insensitive, uh, silly, whatever. In some moods, we might find self deprecating humor hilarious. like the stylings of Nick Miller on New Girl, who says, "Guys, let me hate myself and everything that I have ever created." And so, maybe in melancholy moods, you might find it more funny to hear Nick be self-deprecating. In other moods, you might feel like just stop. Just stop saying that. Whatever. Get some self-esteem, my man. Also, our mood affects how quickly we make or get jokes. Sometimes it's just difficult to be funny, depending on your mood. Sometimes it's difficult to something that you would immediately like, aha, that's a joke. I recognize it. I think it's hilarious. It might just take us a while depending on our mood. And then finally, our mood also changes the kind of humor we even seek out. So even if it doesn't change always what we find funny, the kind of thing that we're feeling up for in terms of humor might change. So, when I'm tired, some gentle comedy of the style of like Superstore, of Amy saying, "I'm all the way over here. How much space do they need?" Is that a really funny line? I mean, no, but is it going to give you a chuckle? Sure. And when you're tired, that's just the kind of pleasant thing that you're really looking for. On the other hand, in some moods, you're looking for something more abrasive, something like, Tim Robinson, is that? Yeah. I was like, I know I'm going to forget his name randomly, right when I'm going to present. Tim Robinson dressing as a hot dog and yelling, "We're all trying to find the guy who did this being misparking a hot dog shaped car." And so that is like a very kind of, it's aggressive. It's very, it's strong. It's not gentle like the kind of humor that you would find on Superstore. It's not relaxing, or at least it's not relaxing in some moods. Anyway, so this is the kind of thing that got me thinking about humor. And kind of as I dug into the idea of like, okay, so how can we account for the ways that moods change our sense of humor, I got more and more into just trying to figure out, okay, what is funniness? What is humor in the first place? And so that's kind of where we're going to go today. And in particular, I mean, you saw this as my title slide. These are all examples of humor, of things that we kind of think of as counting among funny things. Here we have stand-up, we have some memes, we have kind of this potato despairing at its dead brethren in the form of French fries. These are all different kinds of visual jokes. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, kind of as we're thinking about different instances of humor, is that, well, what I found to be really missing in a lot of philosophical literature on humor is that I think people focus too much on jokes. They're really trying to analyze kind of like the 1-2 punch of joking. They really see joking as being something that's set off from the conversation. So you have people like John Morrill, for example. I was reading him. I was like, yes, he's saying most of our joking or like most humor happens in conversations. And I'm thinking, yes, that's great. I think that's exactly right. And he says, yes, and we can see that because we, just in conversation, we'll say something like, hey, have you heard the one about the pig that played basketball? He's a real ball hog. And like I just don't think that's how people mostly do humor in conversation. We don't actually set off our joking from our regular conversation nearly as much as I think a lot of theorists seem to think. So I think most of the time, most of the instances of humor that we experience are actually kind of within chatting with people. And one caveat there, however, is that I'm not really concerned here with what makes us laugh. And the reason that we want to set that off is because, first of all, people laugh for a bajillion different reasons that have nothing to do with amusement. One of the most awkward things is when you nervous laugh at something that is terrible. And the whole reason that it's awkward is that you're worried that it's signaling amusement, when actually what's making you laugh is not amusement at all. It's like horror at the situation or whatever, discomfort. Or a lot of laughing happens just like as a social grease mechanism. You're kind of, I think there was some kind of study there was looking at where they kind of tracked which lines got the most laughing after them. And they were things like, "I'll see you guys later then." Not a funny line. Or, "Hey, how are you?" Ha ha ha. Like, they're not funny lines. People are, and we understand it. People, of course, are gonna chuckle after these things because they're just signaling, hey, like this is fun, we're hanging out. Um, so we're not really asking why or when do people laugh. Or no, we are gonna maybe ask, why do people laugh? No, we're not. We're not gonna ask why people laugh. All right. But now to like kind of take it a bit more formally, I want to get a few distinctions on the board. So really, there is this wonderful book called The Philosophy of Humor by Alan Roberts from 2019, where he draws these really helpful distinctions that kind of surprisingly, I think, haven't been fully laid out in a lot of previous literature on the topic. And so I want to follow him kind of as much as I can. So the first thing is he points out that amusement is just, he wants to define amusement as a descriptive concept. So it's just talking about, it's a particular kind of reaction that we sometimes have is amusement. And amusement, he says, has two elements. There's a cognitive element and there's kind of an affective element, like an element of feeling. And so the cognitive element is about kind of getting the joke. So if you see "hurry up and get to the back of the ship," Smith said sternly, you may find that funny, but only if in your mind you realize that, oh, sternly means like seriously, but also stern means the back of the ship. And then you're like, okay, I see. Get to the back of the ship, said sternly. I gotcha. That's the cognitive element. So the affective element is about kind of your attitude towards that thing. So if I tell you, "I'll never forget the first time we met, but I'll keep trying." You can very much get the joke. You can be like, "Aha, yeah, I see. Usually when people say I'll never forget the day we met, they mean it positively, but you don't." But you can get that and yet still be just devastated by the line. If somebody who is close to you says that to you with a serious face, my goodness, that would be terrible. But on the other hand, you might have this affective element of amusement. The feeling you have about it might be I think we all recognize the feeling. This is my gesture for the feeling that we get of amusement. So then what Roberts does is define humor and funniness in terms of amusement. And so for humor, he says that humor is something intended to elicit amusement. I actually don't think this is quite right, and we'll get in a second to why why I think so. But what I think his most important contribution here is that he points out that a lot of authors writing in the literature are not properly drawing the distinction between the descriptive idea of amusement, which is just about what amuses us, and the normative concept of funniness. And we can clearly distinguish between amusingness, things and funny things, because it makes perfect sense to say, I was really amused by X, but X isn't really that funny. Or, sometimes you were just in the right mood for it. Or maybe, you were, I don't know, why do people get amused by not funny things? It's a cheap laugh. Maybe, it's like not that funny. It's a bit of like cheap slapstick. Yeah, sure. We can be amused by things that aren't that funny. And also we can fail to be amused by things that are very funny. Things that comedians say about their audience's reactions all the time. This is the funniest set. And like they should like I can't believe that people were not amused. Now, sometimes they're just wrong about their set having been that funny, but I think it's at least not inconsistent to say, yeah, a really uh, a really funny joke can nevertheless fail to be amusing. And that can be for a variety of reasons. The audience at the comedy club might be too drunk. They might not have been paying attention. They may not have the right background for that joke. Maybe there were wrong assumptions made on the right case of the comedian about the context, whatever. So what we find really is that funniness is a normative concept. It's much more about kind of it meets a certain, something is funny is when it meets a kind of certain bar of something. And Roberts's answer is that funniness means meriting amusement. And while I on one hand quite like that, I also kind of don't like that. And the reason is that basically you gotta wonder, like, I'm not really sure what he means by meriting here. That somebody should laugh, okay, but who should laugh? Like you could tell a hilarious insult joke. Is the merited amusement from the person who the joke is being told about, the person the joke is told to some audience, to the person who told the joke? It's kind of unclear. And it's also like, in what context does it merit this? Is it always merit it? Unclear. But I think there's something like deeply right here, that funniness is about that funniness is normative, and it is something about something connected at least to getting amusement in one way or another. And so actually, I think that if I had my druthers, I would also change the definition of humor to say that it's something that's intended to be funny and not intended to elicit amusement. So here's an example. When we're playing peekaboo with a baby, we are intending to elicit amusement in the baby, but I don't think we're being humorous. I don't think that counts as an instance of humor. And I think it's because we're not trying to meet some kind of standard here. We're literally just trying to pass the time with the baby. But nothing really hangs on this definition. So if you disagree with me, I'm happy to talk about it, but we shall move on. So the question here really is, what I'm trying to answer it is it for an act to be funny? And there are a number of theories. Now, I've labeled them as amusement theories, and I've phrased them in the terms of amusement theories. The reason for that is that, again, people are not very clear in their definitions about whether they're providing amusement theories, funniness theories, or humor theories. So I've tried to go by like what seems to be the best fit here. So superiority theories, kind of like old Platonic kind of idea of being amused involves feeling superior to the object of the joke. And so we have a nice quote from Hobbes. Hobbes says, "It is the passion which maketh those grimaces called laughter, and is caused either by some sudden act of their own that pleaseth them, or by the apprehension of some deformed thing in another, by comparison whereof they suddenly applaud themselves." So the idea is that basically when you're being funny, you're getting one over on someone. Maybe it's even yourself, but like there's some kind of superiority being uh, expressed. And that's the thing that results in our amusement, that we're like, haha, I am better than you. But the issue is that there are these like very innocent jokes. So, like, why was the Scarecrow given an award? Because he was outstanding in his field. Okay, now again, we might disagree about how funny that is. It is clearly a joke. And also, it's like, uh, who is the joke on? It's not on the Scarecrow. Even if the Scarecrow was conscious, the Scarecrow got an award. What's the issue here? It's very hard to fit a lot of these kinds of innocent jokes or puns or a lot of kinds of ways that we joke into the superiority theory. But I do think we can get an insight from this, and that humor is importantly related to competition. You know, a good joke deserves a good well played. That there seems to kind of be a kind of tussle when we're engaging with humor with each other. So another theory or another set of theories is the relief theories. And that's basically the field of views that says being amused involves feeling kind of a release of energy. So, I think this really points to the structure of a lot of jokes. Well, like the setup punchline, the setup raises the tension, the punchline is supposed to release it. And the idea is that the release of the tension is that, oh, phew, it's all fine, actually. And we see this view well, we see this view popping up in Freud in particular, because of course he's thinking that it's about kind of our repressed urges that we are releasing through laughing at like lewd jokes or something like that. But Cohen, for example, says, and here we can understand what it is that jokes achieve in the service of their purpose. They make possible the satisfaction of an instinct, whether lustful or hostile, in the face of an obstacle that stands in its way. And we do, I think, recognize, like, as I said, there's something deeply intuitive about the idea of raising tension. Here's a joke. What do you call a Black person who flies a plane? The pilot. Why is that funny? Well, because you're like, oh, she's about to tell a racist joke. Oh no. Oh no. Ben is like, I invited her to give a talk and she's about to tell a racist joke in the middle of it. What a disaster. And then, wow. And then I say the pilot, and you're like, oh, thank goodness. And you laugh because you have released the anxiety that you have just built up. So we see something, but on the other hand, a lot of humor actually doesn't release the tension. It actually just ratchets it up, as we see in the terrible scene from the Peep Show where, I'm sorry, this is very gross, but where Jeremy, being placed in an awkward situation, ends up eating an undercooked dog leg to try to pass it off as barbecue. And it is deeply disgusting, and the tension is never resolved. But sort of the more it goes on, because it's so disgusting, you just gets funnier and funnier and funnier. And so I think we do kind of get a lesson from the relief theories, which is that being amused often involves controlling the tension in the room. Then we have incongruity theories, which say that, and this is actually maybe the most popular theory of humor out on the market these days. And it's that being amused is caused by perceiving or appreciating some sort of incongruity. And I mean, you can see that sort of in all the jokes I've told so far, especially like think back to the I'll never forget the day we met, but I'll keep trying. it sets up one kind of interpretation of the first sentence, and then with the second sentence, it forces us to reinterpret the first. So there is a kind of mental shift that happens in a lot of jokes. And so that's what the incongruity theorist is after. And actually, Roberts himself is an incongruity theorist. And in particular, he says, if subject S is amused by object O, then S activates two inconsistent interpretations via unsound reasoning because of O, where O is the object. He says, recall Buster Keaton's slapstick gag, in which he narrowly misses being squashed by a falling house front because the window frame falls around him. Here, two inconsistent interpretations are activated, which assign opposing truth values to the sentence. Keaton will be squashed by the house front, and these interpretations are activated via the false premise that the window frame will not fall around him. So this is a very particular way of making sense of the kind of incongruity involved in jokes. Now, the reason that he feels the need to make it so specific is because incongruity theories have frequently been criticized for not being able to define incongruity in a way that just doesn't make it kind of vacuous, that like kind of anything that's funny we can say is an incongruity. And of course, once we say that, it's not really explanatory to say that amusement involves perceptions of incongruity. So to him, he says, aha, what happens is that there's some claim that we end up sort of seeing as both true and false at the same time in virtue of sort of the joke structure. But just like other incongruity theories, I think his theory suffers from the issue that actually frequently it is not the incongruity that makes us laugh, but the congruity between things. The reason that Alec Baldwin's impressions of Trump are funny is not because of how different they are, but because of how similar they are, in fact. That like he purses his lips just the right way. He apparently was so close that I think CNN accidentally at one point posted a picture of Alec Baldwin when they meant to post a picture of Donald Trump, which is, I mean, surely a great compliment to Alec Baldwin. And so what Roberts ends up saying to examples like this, he says that actually there's still incongruity here. And he's saying that he talks particularly about a case of a caricature. So he says the congruity between the physical traits of the caricature and the character traits of the caricature may enhance the amusement, but ultimately what is essential for amusement is an incongruity between represented and real physical traits. Without this incongruity, there is no caricature and so no amusement. And that seems to track. Okay, yeah. Of course, if it was just like that person, if it was just a photo of that person, yeah, that wouldn't be funny. But he says, moreover, even if a congruency between physical traits and character traits does enhance amusement, then it will only be because the character traits themselves are incongruous compared to normal character traits. And thus, caricatures are not counterexamples to the necessity of incongruity. And so, again, I think that there is something deeply intuitive about what he's saying here. It's true that, I mean, the reason that we laugh at Alec Baldwin is because, you know, he's very much like Donald Trump, but he is not Donald Trump. And it's true that there is some difference between him and Donald Trump. But it's not obvious to me that it is the incongruity here. It still seems to me like the thing that's funny is the likeness. And I think we can see that even better when we're talking about the kinds of humor where we're just making references. So, for example, when we think of, so when Joey in Friends comes in and he mocks Chandler, Chandler is known for saying things like, could I be any funnier? And he says, could I be wearing any more clothes? He is mocking Chandler by trying to sound like Chandler. Okay, so is the incongruity here really that it's that we're assigning truth and falsity to the proposition that Chandler is saying that? Um, or it just seems like, hey, what's funny about this is that you made a reference to a thing that we both recognize if we're walking down the street and I trip. Say Ben and I are walking down the street, I trip, and he says, could you be any more clumsy? Um, I'd punch him. But then I would laugh because not because I at any point was mistaken uh, or even thought that it would be true that he is Chandler from Friends. It's just that he activated an association of something, and we're both like, hey, yeah, that's a funny thing from that one show that you made me think of. And so I think incongruity just doesn't quite capture that. So, but I think it also does capture a really important insight, and it is that we are amused when something stands out to us. That like jokes that just go by us are not very good jokes. Now, finally, I want to get to play theories. So, as you read on the poster, these are somewhat disliked by some folks. And the idea is that being humorous is a type of playing, as in doing something for its own sake. So the kind of playing that we mean when we're saying that, um, somebody's being playful. Um, and a lot of play theories kind of gain traction from people talking about how, well, look, maybe play and humor evolved similarly. So, when you're trying to signal kind of non-threateningness, or you do certain things, and like maybe those things involve joking. So like it's saying like, hey, don't worry about me. I'm not a threat. I'm just a funny person. Um, in case of animals, of course, they play fight, they do all sorts of things. They're not, when puppies are play fighting, they're not actually biting as hard as they could. They're joke fighting. And so I think a lot of the intuitive pull of play theories comes from saying, well, maybe kind of these two came out together. And we get this idea both in Aristotle and Aquinas. Or Aquinas says, those words and deeds in which nothing is sought beyond the soul's pleasure are called playful or humorous, and it is necessary to make use of them at times for solace of soul. It's just things that are done not for other things. Things that are done just for their own sake, for their own pleasure. But the truth is that we can actually use humor not just for its own sake. As the famous story goes of Wittgenstein's poker, that the Wittgenstein and Karl Popper were having this discussion in Cambridge, or I guess Popper was giving a visiting lecture, and Wittgenstein jumped in and started running around and being quite aggressive, objecting to the talk. And in fact, the story goes, grabbed a hot poker out of the fireplace and started waving it around, saying, give me an example of a moral rule. And Popper said, not to threaten visiting lecturers with pokers. And that is a very funny line. This is why it's gone down in history. But you know what? It was not playful. It was not playful at all. And Wittgenstein stormed out because this was the point of making this joke was not just for its own sake. It was very much meant to shut Wittgenstein down. And so I think one of the reasons that so many people dismiss play theory is precisely that. It doesn't really let us explain how we can do humor without being playful. But one thing that they do get quite right is that the social and moral norms sometimes apply in a different way when they're joking than they do in everyday life. For example, insult comics are very popular, and it's not because people love being insulted. It's because there is some kind of license that comedy spaces have that turn those insults into things that are funny. And so some social rules, at least, are suspended. Now, one recent funniness theory, and I say funniness theory specifically because he is the one person who's very explicit about it being a funniness theory, is Stephen Gimbel, who has this 2019 book called Isn't That Clever? A Philosophical Account of Humor and Comedy. And he is picking up on the idea that there's something that, like, when somebody is being funny, they're demonstrating some sort of virtue. And he says that they're demonstrating a cognitive virtue. And so he calls that virtue, or like that series of virtues, cleverness. So he says to do something humorous is to do an intentional, conspicuous act of playful cleverness. So if intention is what humor does us, we can say that his definition of funniness is something is funny when it's a conspicuous act of playful cleverness. And he says there are multiple ways for an act to be clever, but what allows us to term it clever is that it displays a trait of thought that would be advantageous if it applied outside of the play frame. So he says, look, when comedians are being funny, they're demonstrating a skill that is actually that would be useful outside of the comedy context. So like being able to think in very different ways at the same time, or about switching things up, or about making new connections, that kind of thing. The thing that his theory just cannot seem to account for, as far as I'm concerned, is stupid and absurd humor. This is a classic of the old internet. My spoon is too big, and I am a banana. A classic for a good reason. But how is this clever? This is not clever. Is it demonstrating a cognitive virtue? In a sense, perhaps, that if you think this is the kind of absurdity that would hit people right, maybe it's another kind of being like flexible that is being demonstrated. But I think that's quite a stretch. I think cleverness is just not the best way to describe what's going on here. And so I think it involves an important insight, which is that being funny involves some kind of virtue, but I'm just not really sure that cleverness is the thing that's going on. And so here's my theory. That's me. I say that I think that something is funny when it is a good move in a game that is typically concerned with generating amusement. So I think that a game or a good joke is like a good move. And you might think, Tatyana, what are you talking about? There's already this theory by Charles Gruner who says the game of humor. He has the game of humor. And in fact, he does think that humor is about playing a game. But what he says is that it's all about winning. That basically, if you get the other person to laugh, you have won. And the point is to win. And so I just think that he has the wrong theory of games. And so now we turn to, he says, play must involve a winner and a loser, or it isn't much fun. Otherwise, why do we always keep score? I just don't think he's right. I don't think we always keep score. And so I want us to think about games in the way introduced by Tin Nguyen in his book, Games, Agency as Art. I think he makes a wonderful set of points about games more generally. First of all, he points out that we can play games for all sorts of reasons that are outside of the game. You know, we can play them to pass the time, to develop new skills, to win, to fit in, to humiliate somebody. Those are all valid reasons. Well, I'm not sure if playing to humiliate somebody is a valid reason, but it is a reason that some people nevertheless take up. And so his conclusion is that games are the art form of agency. Game designers don't just create environments and obstacles, they set our goals in the game and our abilities. They create the agency which will inhabit in the game, and games can work in the medium of agency to create aesthetic experiences of acting and doing. So what is important here in particular is that he's saying that game design constrains our agency. So like if we're playing soccer, there are particular things that we can do which count as legal moves, as in kicking the ball with our feet. And there are things we can't do, which are illegal moves within the game, which is throwing the ball with our hands. And so playing the game involves constraining yourself within a particular set of rules. And through that rule, we can have a particular kind of aesthetic experience. And in particular, he distinguishes between this idea of striving play and achievement play, where achievement player plays for the win, while the striving player plays to explore to take on this agency and explore what it's like to take on this kind of agency. And so within the game, basically, both of those people, the striving player will also try to beat the other. But it's not because they think that winning is the be all and end all. It's because the game gives you the goal of winning via particular rules. And so you take on temporary goals as a striving player, which is to maneuver in particular ways to beat your opponent. But really what matters to you as a striving player is not the win. And in particular, he says that games can turn competition into cooperation, where players can actually attain that particular value, because good games have good design. Certain games fit psychologically to certain people better. Some people like games where they have to lie, other people don't. We need to match in skills. So like playing against somebody who's significantly better than you is just no fun. But when all three of these come together, even though we might both be trying to beat each other within the game, actually what both of us get is the joy of cooperating, of exploring our agency within the game. And further, he points out that multiplayer games reconfigure their players' social relationships temporarily for the sake of some overall effect. And what that means is some moral and social rules are changed within the space of the game. So, for example, shoving somebody to the ground is not typically permitted within our social rules, but in the case of rugby, that is perfectly allowed. And while on the other hand, there are things that you can do even within the game rules that would still be impermissible. So for example, if we're playing chess and every time I move, I slam the piece on the table, that's pretty rude. Even though it's a perfectly allowed move within the game, it seems like it's something that I shouldn't do. So I think we can apply this idea of games to humor. Thank you, yes. And I think to get us in the mood for that, I think we can think about the games of Cards Against Humanity. How many of you, well, I hope some of you are familiar with this game, but basically it is a vehicle for making jokes. What happens is that all players get a set of white cards. They have certain kinds of word combinations, phrases, scenarios on them. Then the host or the lead for the turn turns over a black card. It has a prompt. And each player selects out of their white cards the thing that they think will make the host pick their card. Now, it's a particularly interesting exercise. So, for example, here, I just searched on the internet. I didn't like design this one. But so they say the black card says, "Mommy, there's a monster under my bed and he wants blank." And 3 players submit. One says, "A cow that farts cows." The other one says, "Dad's anger management problems." And the other one says, "Chicken nuggies." And so, okay, the host now has to choose which white card wins without knowing who submitted that card. Now, one of the most reliable ways to win is to make the host laugh. But not everyone will laugh at the same thing. You have to know what the sense of humor of the host, of the person choosing is. Some people like stuff that's real dark. Some people like stuff that seems really surprisingly fitting. Some people like things that are absurd. And so you have to know, because you can have the best card played to the wrong person, nothing. It's not funny. And the thing is that at the end of the game, technically there is a win condition, as in collect the most black cards. You collect a black card if your white card is chosen. But honestly, nobody ever cares about winning a game of Cards Against Humanity, because really it's all about the process of making these jokes together throughout the game. And so here I think we can easily see that what I think, in fact, funniness is as I said earlier, making a good move within a kind of game that is typically aimed at amusement. And so a good joke during a talk is the kind of joke that's going to make people laugh. But it's not that when you laugh, I won. Sometimes, you make a good move and you don't win. But nevertheless, we can look at it objectively and say, well, was it a good move? I don't know. And all the things that we said apply to games, I think apply to jokes as well. So we joke for all sorts of reasons, those same reasons that we play games: to spend time, to win, to develop new skills, or to humiliate someone. We also can engage. There's also that distinction between striving humor and achievement humor. So, and then I think everyone knows at least one person who's out to score points when they tell jokes. They don't care about whether they're interrupting you. They're like, "I spotted a pun. I am going to tell you this pun right now, and you're going to hear me, and you're going to have to live with the fact that I scored a pun on you." Okay, man, that's great. And I think this distinction between striving play and achievement play helps us see exactly what's kind of annoying about that. It's because usually when we engage in humor, it is for the sake of occupying a certain different kind of agency. When we joke in different ways, we constrain ourselves and our agency in different ways. So, by limiting interpretations of what other people say, by limiting our use of words, by limiting our topics, or even just by limiting our physicality, by moving in a particular kind of way. And also, just like games, humor can turn competition into cooperation through participating. Sorry, I think I made a typo and now I got thrown off. But in any case, the idea is that we can turn kind of humorous exchanges into a cooperative endeavor by sort of matching the humor style, the context, and the audience in the right way. That ultimately, in a good humorous exchange, everyone walks away feeling that they got what they wanted, even if one person had funnier jokes. So, as you'll recall, this is the account. And I think the biggest question that's left, and I will be quick, I promise, is what counts as a good move? And I think that's a good question. But I think there are different ways that we can cash this out. The more descriptive ways to say something that's effective at getting at the objective. So like if your objective is to insult somebody, then whatever insults them. If your thing is to make them laugh, whatever makes them laugh. But I think also aesthetically pleasing is a way that we can describe a good move. We're talking about a chess game. We can talk about effective moves or just like, man, this was really elegant. And I think we can say the same thing of jokes. Like we can also say that they're clever. I think Steve Gumbel is partially correct. And I think there are other ways that we can evaluate good moves as well, for all dimensions by which we actually assess jokes. And in fact, I think good moves in a game are not always intentional. We can be funny without being humorous. So as one of the ending moves, here, actually, we'll skip it. We'll skip it. There is a funny, we have a few minutes. Okay, fine. Here is a case of being funny without being humorous, as in not intending to be funny. The ones who are laughing, you've seen this.
I believe you have a filter turned on in the video setting. You might want to take a find up. Did you hear me, Coach? I can hear you. I think it's a filter. It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant, she's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm live. I'm not a cat. I can see that. If you click the up arrow.
So here clearly we can see, well, if you're playing a game of chess, a cat can come up and accidentally move your piece to just the place that would be the way to checkmate it. And that is a good move. Now, it's not an intentional move. The cat didn't intend anything in putting that piece there, but it was nevertheless, we can say, a good move. And so here, this lawyer, who is importantly not a cat, was absolutely not intending to be funny. So he was not being humorous, but nevertheless, what he did was a good move within, so to speak, the amusement games. Oh no, I ruined it again. I'll just stay here. Oh, I killed it. Yes. Also, I think this gets us to a lot of the issues around inappropriate jokes. So when we're thinking about joking around or playing a game, playing around requires consent. You can't just force somebody to play a game with you. And so throwing a joke at somebody who is clearly not up for joking is in fact inappropriate, in the same way that roping somebody into a game is inappropriate. If I ran up to one of you right now and I say, Tag, you're it, and I ran off, you'd be like, what is she doing? That is not okay. And similarly, if we're at a funeral and I start suddenly telling a joke, you'd say, what is going on? This is just not the right time. I have not given my consent to play in this humor game. But also, we can see that in humor, sometimes social rules are in fact suspended. We are okay with a lot of insults, things that are a little harsher in humor. But nevertheless, I think just in the same way that like slapping your chess piece down aggressively is a move that is permissible technically within the game, but is nevertheless bad and it not be done, we can see that sort of things that technically fit within the rules of humor can nevertheless be inappropriate, bad, morally wrong. And so here is Roseanne's racist tweet, where there's a kind of formula to this. that could be funny. But the issue is that she is slamming the piece down in an aggressive way. It is morally wrong for her to play within the game rules in this particular way. So, kind of going back to the idea of senses of humor, I also think this resolves this question. We can say that moods affect the kinds of games we're up for playing, or how good we are at various games. And one possible difficulty I see with this account is that I would love to discuss with you in Q&A is, why is it then that this is funny? Because if funny things are moves within a game, okay, whose move is this? Who's playing with the game here? The cat is not playing the game of humor. Does it work? So on that, thank you for listening. Sorry for going on for, I think, way too long. Right? Okay.
You were more or less right within the bounds, actually. So congratulations. You played the game within those specifications successfully, I would say. Yeah, that was pretty unfunny, but I guess better to start poorly and then work one's way up, right? So we now have some time for Q&A. I'm happy to start forming a queue. This goes obviously for those in the room as well as those on. Okay. Ellen, why don't you start us off? There is a microphone there. I can look around the room for others to enter the queue as well.
Okay, thank you so much for the lovely talk. I have two questions. First question dealing with political humor, and you mentioned about caricature, you know, the imitation or even insulting of Donald Trump, but, you know, that, you know, I want to say something that happened recently. You know what happened about that congressional hearing about 3 presidents, you know, Harvard, MIT, and UPenn about that whole thing. And right after that, you know, NBC Saturday Night Live have this kind of a so-called humorous performance of mocking at the Congresswoman Stefanik. It tend to be humorous. I mean, I used to like, you know, the show a lot, but that particular humor made so many people so mad. So, and people say, I see a lot of reviews say it's really a humor with very bad taste. So of course, there's some kind of political implication there. So I'm just wondering, what's your take on that particular incident? And secondly, I'm thinking about, we talk about humor and humiliation. I mean, I think one of the best thing, a funny thing about the humor is that you can humiliate, doing humiliation either for, over yourself or others, but in a kind of really funny way. So that reminded me, one of the best comedian that I love in the United States is Woody Allen. But Woody Allen, I mean, of course, is a movie director as well, an actor. But people usually say, okay, for Woody Allen, there's kind of like a particular Jewish humor. It's a Jewishness. So, so that reminded me of a question one you didn't mention here, but like to talk about is the connection between particular humor, mood, and somebody's ethnicity. Because when we say, oh, it's a Jewish humor, and you can list all the something about Jewish. One thing I really love is for the Jewish, that's the humor they by Jewish people by themselves. They really make fun of themselves. They say for Jewish people, when you ask them, where are you going tonight? And they will say, oh, I'm going to ballet. Everybody say, I'm going to ballet to show have a really high taste. And then the humor is that I do hope they got the best there in the theater so I can sleep in there watching ballet. They get bored, but they love to say that. So that's kind of Jewishness. And then Woody Allen also have a lot of this kind of self, you know, humiliation. So also I like you, maybe a couple of comments on that particular kind of humor. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for both questions. So I should say so this is as I said, this is a new topic for me. So like I am very much still developing the view. And so this is super helpful. Yeah, so I think about the political, so the political humor issue. So one of it is I think this is very much like that example of, well, I guess so. There are people, who say that like there are certain things that we just can't joke about, and there are other people who say like no, 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 it just has to be a really good joke. And I do think I personally land somewhere in the middle, and I do think that one of the things is that it might be the case that, so actually I'm not familiar with the SNL sketch that you're referring to. But I suspect that what's happening there is that in the same way that it would be when we're thinking about playing a particular game, not all games are, let's see. There might be games that are just by themselves bad games. And so like succeeding with a particular within a bad game might nevertheless be still morally blameworthy. So even if it is something that, so here I'm thinking like if you what was it? There are some European countries where they would compete over who could throw a cat higher up. And that seems to me like an example of just like an inherently immoral game. So one possible response is to say something like, there are certain ways of constraining our agency for jokes that are just going to be inherently immoral. I think that maybe, but it doesn't sound like that's what's going on in the SNL sketch. They seem, so I mean, I'm not sure. Is it like a kind of too soon issue? The issue is that it was just very insensitive?
Well, the hearing is about the genocide of the Jews.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
A lot of people really watching that.
Yeah.
And then you have this kind of political humor show, certainly not famous for being a politically, funny. And most case people love their show, I mean, particularly people from the liberal side.
Yeah.
But that particular show, then people, oh, you make fun of this
I see.
really serious stuff. So that's my question is that should we be really careful how to
Yeah.
play the game for political humor?
I
Because
see.
that, generally speaking, I really love any kind of political humor. But that specific case shows that
Yeah.
sometimes maybe you cross the line, you cannot do
Mhm.
it. So how do we know the line here? What should we do? What
Yeah,
we
I mean,
shouldn't do?
one of the things that I definitely think that this account is not gonna, I mean, it's not gonna directly tell us where the line is. I think
Okay.
like further theorizing has to happen about where the line is. But like I think it has the resources to like start telling us maybe some of the avenues in which we might draw the line. So for example, this seems like a case that there are certain bad times to play certain kinds of games. As I like, again, you can't whip out a chessboard at a funeral. You just can't. That is not appropriate. You can't play tag, suddenly start a game of tag at a funeral. Now, I mean, what's really complicated about humor games, I think, is that they are obviously not contained in the same way that like regular games are. There isn't like a particular space where the game is taking place. And one of the things that's extra hard now is that there are very different audiences depending on kind of the medium of presentation. So like with SNL, the audience is so broad that kind of the rules of the game have to be like if the purpose of the game is to amuse people, you have to take into account that who the audience of the game is or who the audience of your move is. And if the audience is currently deeply absorbed by a certain kind of grief or shock or indignation, it's just a bad play to try and make them laugh about it. That is, it's just not the way to get amusement. Like, now I think like what you're bringing up also brings up a really good point, that sometimes the point of political humor is to rile people up specifically. But I think SNL is usually not that. And I think that's specifically what they were going for, is presumably like people turn on SNL to relax and they see this thing which they're already worked up about, and it's just really bad move. It's a bad move. Yeah, sorry. I feel like that took me a while to get to. As for the Jewish humor issue, I think there's going to be, I think it's natural. The different populations are going to like different games. Look, you like go to one place, people play, like if you go to the Midwest of the US, people play euchre a lot in cards. If if you go to like I don't know, oh yeah, well I live in India. People love cricket there. Love cricket there. I don't get it. I don't get cricket, but it's a thing. And so yeah, I think it's just going to be a kind of like people develop different ways regionally or within certain in groups about the kinds of games that they identify with. Yeah, whether that be like self-deprecating games or games about like sort of writing on certain kinds of stereotypes of ourselves or whatever. Things like that.
Okay, we are joined by Nevia in the Zoom call. So I would invite Nevia to maybe share screen or sorry, turn their camera on. Okay, we can hear you. I think what I'll do though, just for visibility's sake, is stop sharing the slides for a moment, if that's okay. Okay, so now we can see you. Great, go ahead, Nevia.
Hi, thank you for this talk. The theme is so interesting, and actually I had fun although I did not get all the jokes that you presented. I mean, some of them I did not get, and in fact, my question is related to it. Your main objective is to address the question, what is humor? And then it seems like you tended to consider as instances of humor different sort of things. For example, sarcasm is there. It works with, it has very different features from some kind of joke or humorous conversation, but still you take it to be an instance of a humor. You also consider instances of humor, those cases that are non-intentional, like accidents that happen, like the typical accident that happens, like when sleeping on a banana, for example.
I think accidents can be funny, but not humorous, because humor is intending to be funny.
Okay, so you don't consider non-intentional cases as instances of humor. Okay, so my question is about the context that you take into account for addressing the question. So clearly we are in the context of a communication, right? So do you think that necessarily in order to address the question, what is a humor, we should consider cases of a communication when at least two individuals are involved? This is my my first question. And the second one is about my experience of not getting some of the jokes, like the one about the spoon and the banana. This is a typical, I mean, it's very typical. Maybe you are in a conversational context and you make a joke. It happens many times in my classes. For example, my students don't get the joke, right? It's not, I don't think it's because they are not cooperating. It's because my joke entails some kind of a background knowledge that we don't actually share. And because humor, at least in my, say, in intuitive view, is deeply based on the mechanisms of language and relies on implicit communication. So the speakers need to be able to make inferences from what is said to what is not said. So I wonder whether this background knowledge or the capacity to say, so my question basically is, these are cases of a humor that are unsuccessful conversations. Right? So consider the Gracian theory of communication. Of course, there are cases in which we are successfully humorous, and cases in which we are not successfully humorous. So it seems to me that at least two individuals must be taken into consideration in order to account for humor. And that the context also is about successful communication, because I don't see otherwise how we can make it work. So I would like to know what you think about this.
Yeah. So I think a couple things. It's a great question about whether it has to be two people or more. I like my initial inclination is to say no, just because it seems like, well, I think it really depends on where you're the kind of person who makes yourself laugh. Like, we can amuse ourselves in various kinds of ways. And sometimes you come up with something witty, or something you think is witty, and you might chuckle to yourself. I think that's apt for being funny. As a way to entertain yourself. So like, part of me doesn't think that it has to be multiple people. But as far as successful communication, yeah, I think it is I think this is why specifically the distinction between humor and funniness becomes really important here, is that you can, like, humor is just, on the definition kind of that I've provided, is just kind of like is intending to be funny or trying to be funny. And so there's no success. Like, you can be humorous without actually being successful at all. In fact, I think a lot of people are humorous without being funny. They try to tell a joke and it just doesn't land. But most of us, I think, are in the place where, like, some of our jokes land, some of our jokes don't land. And I guess I'm hesitant to put that in terms of communication, because sure enough, some jokes, even most jokes, I think, do maybe mean to communicate something, but some of them don't mean to communicate anything. Like, I don't think the scarecrow joke of he was outstanding in his field communicates anything, really. It really is just about playing, like, making a simple move to get you to have a particular kind of reaction. So I don't think it's necessarily about communicating content. I mean, it is certainly intended to affect you in certain way, and that might be successful or not. I'm not sure, does that kind of address some of your worry?
Yes, sure. Yes. So just to confirm with you, so is the so for you, even if in a context in which the speaker is presenting the interlocutor with a humorous joke or a humorous line, and the interlocutor cannot get this humor, cannot get the joke, so this still would be an instance of humor, right? That you include for your account of humor. as
Yeah.
as a case to start. Okay, yeah.
Exactly. It can be a piece of humor, even if it's not funny and even if it's not amusing. So like, again, like as you said, I feel like I'm suddenly flashing to a lot of student interactions of like, oh, I thought you would really enjoy this reference, or you did not. It just passed by like nothing. And that theme seems like, yeah, I was trying to be funny and I ended up not being funny.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like for the moment Luke has disappeared, so we could head over. You had a question? Because we have one more ahead of you. So we'll go to Victoria. Ellen, could you pass your microphone? That would be convenient. Thank you. We'll get to you next, John.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. I haven't thought about any of these issues before, so thank you for that. So my question is fairly informed. It's just that I can't help seeing a similarity between the cats that you ended with and Wittgenstein and the poker. So yeah, so it seems that there's something structurally similar about these cases. I'm not quite sure.
What is the first case? The Wittgenstein and
The
Poker?
Wittgenstein and the poker with Popper and the funniness of that situation.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, and I also have just a puzzle or a question about the actual Wittgenstein case. So do you know if it was received as humorous by the others in the room? Because it seems that Wittgenstein, as usual, was just taking himself too seriously. He storms out, which makes part of the funniness. But he's not playing the game. So how would this scenario be analyzed according to your game theory?
Yeah, I mean, this seems like him storming out seems very much to me like the equivalent of like upending the board. Or like, well, this game is over, I'm done. And you know, it's obviously an unfriendly move. But yeah, about the actual history of the question, I did start reading the book Wittgenstein's Poker, and I got about 1/3 of the way through it, enough to understand that there are various interpretations of what happened that night, and not far enough into the book to know if we can get an authoritative account on how it actually went down. I mean, it's actually, I think, quite likely that maybe that's not how the exchange went. But
yeah, so then it is more like, I think the case you ended with, the cat and was it a seal?
oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's very funny watching it, but it was probably not funny for either of them.
Sure. Yeah. And I think there, what happens is that, like, well, the move ends up being people telling that story to others in a particular kind of way. Like, oh, you won't believe what happened the other night. And of course, you know, if it's the kind of story that they're likely to enjoy, yeah, now you've made a good move in the game, because everybody loves hearing embarrassing stuff about their professors or whatever. Yeah, so I think I think that has to end up being something like the account I give for, as you said, like the image of the cat slapping the seal, where like, well, of course the cat isn't making the move, but the person posting the video is the one intending the video to be the move in the game, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Luke, did you still wish to enter the queue?
It's too busy taking notes over here. Right. So I think that in these past couple of questions, what we've kept coming back to is like the audience. There's some sort of reciprocal factor here as well, and playing also with this notion of consent. And I think possibly because it's rules of the game, so to speak, that what's funny about humor, particularly when there's like, oh, the joke is bad or like in poor taste, is that there's a kind of ambiguity as to what the rules of that game actually are.
Mhm.
And that's where I think that skill component comes into it, right? Or that virtue of sort of understanding the audience, right? Because we see with racial jokes, what matters is not only the audience, but also the subject, like the person who's telling the joke. And then right for the SNL skit, whatever it was, in some sense, when you sit down at the SNL studio or you tune in, you are giving consent to being involved in at least spectating that game of comedy, so to speak. But it's not really clear what's being consented to, right? Like you're not given a full worksheet of what all the different varieties of jokes are, right? Because that would not be expedient. It also wouldn't really be funny if you knew it was like going to come as part of the comedy routine, right? Of course, some comedians you already know kind of what their style of humor is. But if something comes out of left field, sometimes that's even funnier or it becomes insulting. So could you speak to that kind of context of like the ambiguity of the consent involved in jokes? Thanks very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. 2 points. One, I think that like this I've been thinking about this. I'm like, I wonder if my account can survive this. In fact, that like, well, are there games where we play where we don't actually know the rules? Because like presumably one of the things that I have to say here is that we don't always know what game we're playing. And I think like in a certain kind of non-analytic mood that strikes me as just fine. Look, that's just how the world is. We don't always know the situations we find ourselves in. And you know, somebody can tell us halfway of like, well, we changed the rules or whatever. But yeah, like, does that, I mean, obviously that doesn't happen in the kind of games that we're frequently familiar with. Now, again, you laughed when I brought up euchre in the Midwest. And one of the other features of playing euchre in the Midwest is I feel like every family has their own rules, and or like special things that they do during the game. And so you might think that you can enter a game thinking that it's one kind of game, and then it turns out to be a slightly different kind of game. And that doesn't mean that you weren't playing that game. You're just like, well, um, so I guess that's kind of my best guess stab at that right now. But I think that's like a really pressing question. Now, to the other kind of aspect of what you're saying about like consenting specifically to certain things, it's funny that you bring up this case. There's this is a bit autobiographical. Um, I recently got into a fight with a comedian on Instagram. Why did I get into a fight with this comedian? Is because, well, I mean, he basically he's doing crowd work. He points to an old lady in the audience and he says, "So you're the oldest person in the room?" And she's like, "Seriously?" And he goes, like, he starts making fun of her for being old. And he's like, I'm like, "Well, how old do you have children? Well, how old are they?" And she's like, "I'm not going to tell you." And he says, "What, I can't even ask you how old your children are?" And he starts going on about like why he and his wife like haven't had children yet. And he's like, "Do you have any advice for me?" And she's like, "You're going to figure it out." And he says, "Well, all of you people say that, but like, will I really figure it out?" And she says, "Well, how dumb are you?" And that's truly the funniest part of the video. Anyway, I saw that and I was like, wow, that woman really did not want to talk to you at all. That doesn't seem okay at all. And I came across this clip on Instagram Reels. I don't follow this person. I don't know who this comedian is. I just saw this clip and I was like, oh my God, that was not cool what he was doing. And I don't know what kind of devil pulled my tongue, because why would you ever comment on anything on Instagram? But I did, and I said, "Look, I'm engaging with you in good faith, but like, and I appreciate crowd work, but like, it really seems like you should not point out people's marginalized status as part of your crowd work. Like, can you imagine somebody being like, 'So you're the most disabled person in this room,' or like, 'You're the most fat person in this room'? Great. That's terrible." Um, So I said that. And then he responded and he said, well, he made some more old jokes about that woman, but he also said, this was a specifically crowd work show, and all the participants were informed that they were going to be like possibly insulted, and we gave them a safe word that if they really did not want to be addressed, they could just use it and I would stop. Okay, I mean, I feel like that changes everything entirely. But on Instagram, that was not noted. And so I feel like there are kind of like different games involved here. Whereas like in one context, okay, I mean, I still don't think what he said was funny, but at least I don't think it was unethical. Versus like in the Instagram context, again, I didn't even have to subscribe to him to see it. I have no idea who he is. He might just be just a random jerk on the internet. Like, I mean, like me. And so, yeah, I think you're right that like there is a certain amount of consent that involves like tuning into SNL, but I think also we are playing to different audiences. I'm sorry if I'll allow myself one more second to. So there is this podcast that one of my friends listens to called Game of Roses, and it analyzes the show The Bachelor as if it were a sport. And so they talk about like winning moves and scoring points, and they particularly talk about playing to 4 different audiences. And so like, because your first audience is The Bachelor, so you want that, like whatever you say, you want them to like it. But you also are playing to the second audience, who are the other contestants. You want them to see you in a particular way. And you're also playing to a third audience, which is the producers of the show, because they want to create something watchable. And so, then there's the fourth audience, which is the people then watching the show. And you have to like pitch yourself in a way that they will also want to watch you. And it seems like it's like the particular skill of being able to play to all 4 audiences at once. You might be able to play to one, but not the other. And so I think this is like, I don't know, my friend who does like one of those wordles that's like 4 wordles at once. It's like, I think it just ups the difficulty of the game, playing multiple games in at the same time, or playing just a very complex game.
Well, there are still a few people in the queue. However, our official time together has come to a close. So perhaps those who were hoping to ask questions might find occasion to do so downstairs at the Port Club. For now, though, I'd love it if we all came together one more time to thank our speaker.
Thank you so much, everybody. This was really helpful.
So please do come downstairs for more conversation. We have lots of food, nice food, and